Hello everyone, my name is Anaïs and I am the PharmD Community of Practice Analyst. I welcome you all to our live talk number 8, which will focus on confronting challenges in gender smart climate and disaster risk finance, resources and toolkits. This live talk is organized and promoted by PharmD and the Center of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions within the framework of their engagement together with the Platform for Agricultural Risk Management and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Just before starting, I just wanted to let you know that this session is recorded and will be available on replay and shared on our website and social media. And of course, during this webinar, you are more than welcome to share your reflections or ask your questions using the chat box that you will find on the bottom of your screen. And then the speakers will direct your questions during the dedicated time. And eventually at the end of the webinar, you will see appear an automatic survey, which is useful for us to give us some feedback. And now I will also share the link to our PharmD Community of Practice, which is an interactive space for exchanges and also to receive peer-to-peer support on agricultural risk management. And also it's a space to share knowledge and best practices. And so we highly encourage you to subscribe and just join us there. And now, without further ado, I will leave you the floor, Jonathan. Over to you.
Thank you, Anaïs. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone who's joining us. I'm delighted to open this 8th session already of the live talk series facilitated by the Center of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions together with PharmD, where we cover different topics related to gender and climate and disaster risk finance. A big thank you to all of you who are joining today. It's great to see that you're keen to broaden your knowledge on gender and climate risk finance. And of course, big thank you to our panelists and to PharmD for facilitating this session for the 8th time. We're here today with Catherine Miles, our moderator, and we will hear from our leading experts, Anya and Lisa from the World Bank, as well as Milena from the Access to Insurance Initiative, who will present and discuss the latest toolkits and publications. Perhaps a few words on the Center of Excellence. In case you don't know us, we are a knowledge sharing and advisory platform, which is hosted by the Global Shield Against Climate Risks and co-financed by Global Affairs Canada and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. That's the setup, but of course we are filled with life and knowledge from our community of gender practitioners, policymakers within our gender working groups and beyond. Among the activities that we provide, there is our technical advisory support on gender for various actors in the Global Shield countries. We also commission guidance notes on gender responsive climate disaster risk finance and insurance studies. We organize events like these, and we offer scholarships to high potential women leaders. You're of course warmly invited to visit our platforms and to share your publications or reach out for us if you have any questions. And with that, I will hand over the floor to our moderator, Catherine Miles, to guide us through this live talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. So from my side, I'd also like to warmly welcome our speakers today, both Anya and Lisa from the World Bank Global Shield Financing Facility and Milena from the Access to Insurance Initiative. We'll be speaking to them in a moment. Just in terms of our agenda today, we're going to have a brief scene setting presentation to begin with, to really reflect on the progress on Gender Smart CDRFI before we then have our panel discussion. This panel discussion will allow us to deep a bit deeper into the current challenges and practices around this area. And then we'll hear from each of our speakers who are going to spotlight very specific recent resources on gender and CDRFI to guide you all in overcoming the challenges that we'll be elaborating on to integrate equality considerations into your CDRFI initiatives. So we will have this question and answer at the end. So just to remind you that there are these opportunities for you to share using the chat function questions with our speakers and share your own reflections as well. And we'll be able to answer those hopefully at the end of this session, and if not, follow up with you afterwards. But before we start, I'm going to really just reflect on the progress we've got to. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next slide, please. So I'd like to reflect on the progress that we've made over the last 5 years. Now, it's 4 years since we've had the first live talk on gender and climate risk finance. And during that first webinar, the discussions really focused on the business case for applying a gender lens to CDRFI and integrating gender into different models of climate risk insurance. And these were based on the first initial publications on these themes published under the Insure Resilience Global Partnership in 2018 and 19. So those were the first two, really setting out that theory. And at this stage, we were really making the case for why and how, in theory, gender considerations could be integrated into these early models at the micro, meso, and macro levels. There were really few examples at this time, and we pulled from good practices in inclusive insurance and the financial inclusion space with this, really to make the case specifically for this kind of quite niche area of gender smart CDRFI. And we were really seeing a need at that time to look at the basics, really to make the case on sex disaggregating beneficiary data, for instance, or thinking about distributional approaches, which were allowing women's access specifically to climate risk insurance. And this was really against a backdrop which has changed actually over the last 5 years, where at that time there was still incredible persistent gender gaps in women's financial inclusion, and also in terms of access to handsets and usage of mobile handsets to enable digital distribution models of climate risk insurance. So, and that was in not university, but in some specific geographies. So really at that stage, we were focusing on the what and the why of gender and CDRFI. We then moved on over time, and you can see some of the publications on the screen here, where we then started to unpack some of the case specifically, first of all, to policymakers, and that was thinking about the convergence of different international and national policy priorities and commitments related to the UNFCCC's Paris Agreement, for instance, and the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and the SDGs. And we also framed it within the framework of the Sendai framework around disaster risk reduction. And what we were finding then, there were common themes that were emerging that were relevant for climate risk insurance related to gender dimensions of vulnerability, sex disaggregated data, ensuring women's participation, for instance, in leadership and in the consultation exercises to inform these CDRFI related policies. And so, well, there were recommended good practices that were emerging. We were finding at that stage that there was still more widespread implementation that was needed. And the research that we were doing, which you can read online in the Centre of Excellence, was really shining a light on what the possibilities were rather than actual operational practices. And so there was really a need to be focusing on operationalizing this to really improve the financial protection and build the climate resilience of women and men who are most vulnerable to climate change and disasters. But what we found since then is that momentum has gathered, and you're starting to trial and test some of these practices. And we've been able to generate some guidance notes on the themes related to monitoring and evaluation of CDRFI programs, in actual policies themselves, translating these commitments into policies on the ground, and also in terms of gender lens investing, how your grant making or investments in insurance, in climate risk insurance models can drive change as well, to achieve better sex disaggregated data on beneficiaries and explore the differential impacts around access and usage of climate risk insurance. Next slide, please. We also, over time, developed a self-assessment toolkit for policymakers to identify existing gender practices and gaps in national CDRFI related policies and develop recommendations to make these policies gender smart. So this is because policies can drive practices on the ground. And with that, I think we've really made significant progress based on the insights gained through the Centre of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions and specifically the recent technical advisory facility, where we're now seeing practitioners considering actively these gender dimensions of climate and disaster vulnerability and exposure in risk modelling, for instance, and in vulnerability assessments to inform product development. We're now also thinking about gender-based violence dimensions of CDRFI instruments, and that's where there is really clear evidence of these impacts resulting from climate change and disasters. And so we're now seeing operational practices both in the sovereign instruments that are emerging and in the micro and meso models of insurance. So really, that is the context where we're at today from our perspective and some of the resources that we've got online. So visit the Centre of Excellence for that. And with this, what I'd like to do is then move towards our panel, where we're going to hear a little bit more, as I say, about the current challenges and current operational practices that we're seeing on the ground. So with that, I think we've got our panelists online. So thank you for joining us today. And we're going to really reflect on the progress that we've seen over the different this time period from your respective perspectives. So I'd like to first of all turn to Anya and Lisa from the World Bank and from the Global Shield Financing Facility perspective, and really sort of unpack with you what you feel that the progress has been and what has been achieved in gender smart approaches over the last 5 years, and where do you think there are still challenges related to this?
Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to take this one. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Before I get right to the question, let me just in a sentence or two set the scene in terms of how we work on disaster risk finance in the bank, and more particularly within the GSFF Trust Fund that you just mentioned, which Lisa and I work for in terms of gender. So in GSFF, DRFI is always part of a larger World Bank operation. So we have the giant operation, then disaster risk finance is a bucket, a component, a sub part of that big project. And within that, we're trying to integrate gender into a much larger thing. So it's worth considering, you know, the implications in terms of resource limitations, competing resources, competing priorities. That's kind of the backdrop of how we work. In terms of progress, let me step back again a tiny bit from DRFI and quickly talk about World Bank progress as a whole in terms of gender over the past 5, 6, 7 years, because of a lot of the lessons we've learned translate from sector to sector, and what we've learned we can apply, and it translates well into disaster risk finance. We had our first gender strategy, which whose cycle is coming to an end. It focused on, if you will, the basics maybe back then, right? Awareness raising, capacity ramp up, setting up an internal architecture on how we can work to integrate gender into operations. And we put very big emphasis on gender at design. We have, in fact, sort of an automated or a systematic check mark for, you know, quality control of gender at design. Now we're moving to the second gender strategy, which is about to be released. I don't have time to get into all the stuff that is introducing, but one of the big shifts is, you know, from that design quality control towards implementation quality, results achievement, systematic capturing of results. So it's kind of a second generation, more mature strategy. Now, if we want to zoom into DRFI within that bigger picture, I'd say that gender is more nascent. It's still less systematically embedded to date into our operations. There still is some work to be done, but we can draw on experiences, as I said. Now, within GSFF, the trust fund that is housed within the bank, we're expected to, of course, contribute to the institution's overall gender goals. And we've made a lot of progress during year one of the trust fund. It's still a pretty young and new trust fund. We have a strategy which rests on 4 main pillars that revolve around knowledge creation, partnership building, processes, and capacity building. We have embedded gender into our processes and systems in terms of trust fund administration, administrative processes, and the meat of the grants. We're developing new resources. More on that later in the later part of this session. We have a training for project leaders, DRFI and gender training, and we're collecting emerging implementation lessons, something we call knowledge nuggets that we're slowly publishing as well. Now, moving to the challenges, you can summarize it in translating all this into operations, translating all this into our projects. We sort of know what to do. I mean, there's more research to be done. The evidence base is still a bit limited, but we kind of know what to do. But how we do this now, how do we make people, incorporate gender and our knowledge into operations? There's still limited awareness among some project leaders, also limited counterpart knowledge and maybe capacity. the systematic results capturing and synchronized reporting structures among organizations, I mean, that's like a pipe dream, right? It's still not there. Statistical capacity in country may be lower than we would want it to. We don't always have enough higher level championing of the cause either, because gender and DRFI are not yet sort of obvious mates, right? It doesn't pop into most practitioners' heads to do gender when they design an insurance product. So there's still some awareness raising that we need to be doing. And I'd also say it's up to us to make the links maybe a little bit more forcefully, to communicate the business case a bit more compellingly. Gender is, well, it's not a charity case, right? Women are not, and I still read this all the time and it drives me crazy, women are not vulnerable victims that we have to somehow assist. No, that's not the case, right? We have to just create the enabling environment. They're perfectly able to do the same stuff that men are able to do. So I think my time is probably up, but that would in a nutshell summarize the progress and the challenges, I would say.
No, that's great. It's really great to see the momentum that's building and sort of the journey you've been on, as well as thinking about how to embed into the institutional policies. And that's what we've found through the technical advisory facility that we've been working with partner organizations through the Centre of Excellence. Actually, it's at that institutional embedding that is needed. And we're going to turn to Milena now, and I think some of the points that you mentioned around statistical capacity, for instance, is maybe of relevance to Milena in the work that you're doing specifically at Access to Insurance Initiative. And you're working with insurance supervisors and regulators on inclusive insurance. So, from your perspective, what progress have you seen in terms of gender smart CDRFI approaches, and what are the challenges from your perspective related to that, please?
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, morning, or evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I would also just like to spend maybe 2 minutes on giving the context of who we are, what is it that we do. Like Catherine mentioned, we are Access to Insurance Initiative, and we are at the moment a project hosted by GIZ since our establishment in 2009. We were established by several partners, but one of our core founders is International Association of Insurance Supervisors, and this is a standard-setting body for the insurance industry. And IS members are over 200 jurisdictions, so they do cover around 97% of the market share. And we are IAS's implementation partner when it comes to inclusive insurance. We build capacities of insurance supervisors. So we only work with insurance supervisors, and we build their capacities on inclusive insurance. We do have different tools and formats that we use for this. A lot of resources are available on our website. We're at the moment between 10 and 15 people. We are based in Germany, but we do have regional coordinators that are based in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and that support our work in these regions. I mentioned that we are hosted since our establishment by GIZ. However, we are at the moment, and in the next year, we will be transitioning from outside from GIZ, probably to another hosted option. GIZ has been an excellent host for us. However, we were set up as a project with a limited lifespan, and then IAS and other partners agreed that there is continued need to support inclusive supervisors on inclusive insurance. So we are looking for a more long-term sustainable setup, which hopefully will be decided this summer, and then we'll have a year of transition. We are organized in portfolios within A2II, and at the moment we have inclusive insurance fundamentals portfolio. Gender is one of our portfolios alongside climate, digital, and then we have one portfolio where all other categories also. Going back to the progress, I would say what we are noticing in working closely with insurance supervisors is that gender, again, alongside climate, is a topic that's moving up supervisors' agenda, and not just gender and climate, but also the nexus between these two areas. We see more and more requests to support supervisors when it comes to gender. Of course, the context of our work does come from the work of International Association of Insurance Supervisors, and they've adopted D&I, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as one of the key strategic teams of their supervisory work program. And they have really important working groups. They're organizing working groups working on this. So, for example, at the moment, Market Conduct Working Group is working on a D&I application paper on how one of the insurance core principles can be implemented for the fairer treatment and better outcomes of those consumers that are minority, vulnerable, underserved, or have different specific needs. And also at the same time, Governance Working Group is continuing their work on D&I, and they're working on another application paper that's focusing on the signs or flags to a supervisor that what happens when an insurer might have issues with D&I and what supervisor can do in response. Insurance regulation tends to be still gender neutral, and unintentionally it still overlooks on specific gender specific needs or constraints. And we all know that women have unique risks, and then that gender neutral products do not meet these unique needs. Some of our earlier work, and Katrin will know some of these resources because she was involved in developing those, identified some actions that can be taken by insurance supervisors to enable greater access to better, if not high quality insurance for women. And one of the actions that was identified throughout, let's say, series of our projects was to start collecting and using sex disaggregated insurance data. And this is what we've been, we see this is a great challenge, and we've been working on over the past year and a half. I will present it a little bit later, that realizing that there is no comprehensive data set on women's access to insurance, neither on the demand nor the supply side. And even when research finds that there's limited data that exists, then there is inadequate analysis done to understand how these insurance products are accessed and how are they used by men and women differently. We've started looking at this, just thinking, how can we improve something if we cannot measure it? And if we don't know the extent of these inequalities, if we don't know if we don't have sex disaggregated data, how can we know what products and services women value or need? What distribution channel would they prefer? What challenges they face, for example, in making claims? Again, we believe, at least for us, and this informed our work, that the first step was understanding the current state of women's access and uptake of insurance and representation in the insurance industry. Again, I'll talk about this a bit later, but again, this is why we developed the tool that we'll talk about. I don't know if you've listened, I think last week on Thursday, Microinsurance Network released their Microinsurance 2023 landscape report. And again, I think that no information was provided on the gender of policyholders by half of the respondents that participated in their survey. So I'll stop here and then just say that we believe that we need to build a more accurate picture of the size of the gender protection gap in order to be able to address it. Thank you.
Really helpful data. Yeah, seems to always come up from different perspectives, and the disaggregation of that, but also different data points. Maybe Anya and Lisa, we've heard about some of the challenges from your perspective, and also from, in terms of data as well. I'm just wondering, from your experience, what are the kind of practical examples of approaches that you're recommending to overcome and respond to the challenges, and maybe including those data challenges too? Thank you.
Sorry, I'll take that. Hello all. I'd just like to recap on something that Anya previously said. Just by way of the bank's disaster risk financing and insurance portfolio is certainly less advanced than other areas in the bank in terms of systematic integration of gender. But certainly in the last couple of years, we've made, I think, very positive steps forward with getting an organisational shift to embed gender. So in terms of some of the operational gender approaches we've tried and tested at a program and organisational level, you need a strategy or an action plan that sets out a roadmap of where you want to get to. So it includes where you are, where you want to get to, and the resources required to get there. And with regards to GSFF, we actually have a gender strategy which sets out some, as Anya said, some key strategic objectives of where we want to get to. The predecessor to GSFF, which was the previous trust fund, GRIF, had a gender action plan with concrete activities spelled out. But what I'd like to emphasise is these, a strategy and a tool, a strategy or an action plan, they don't need to be complex. I think if they're simple and straightforward, it's the better way to sort of shift behaviours organisationally. And they're extremely important tools that help to sensitise staff and give and elevate sort of gender. It gives it greater visibility. They're really important tools with regards to accountability, because at some point you report on the implementation on those plans or strategies. So you'll need results. They're really important, I think, tools for making change at an organisational or program level. At a country level, with government and country counterparts, I think it's really important to kickstart gender issues in policy dialogue as early as possible. And disaster risk financing and gender awareness is not yet as deep as we would ideally like, obviously, with the bank clients. So gender needs to be put on the agenda very early in those initial policy conversations in a project preparation stage. So what does this actually mean in practice? It's getting gender expertise on the project team from the start. It's getting gender considerations factored into the design phase, and where the bank's concerned, making sure that gender is meaningfully embedded in the formal project design documentation. And in the bank context, that's a project appraisal document. I just want to go through a number of sort of different operational approaches that I think are highly important. At a country level, it's important to get gender considerations incorporated into country disaster risk financing strategies and plans. And this is an area of increasing importance, I think, to the disaster risk financing teams. They're certainly providing increasing assistance to clients to include gender considerations in plans and strategies. We have a raft of operations at different levels of maturity, which bank teams are providing this kind of assistance. In Morocco, they already have a disaster risk financing strategy, but that will soon be revised. In the case of the Caribbean, there are several countries receiving support to embed gender in DRFI strategies. Case of Solomon Islands, there's some initial consultations, etc. And I think another approach, which is really, really important operationally in the disaster risk financing space, is expanding partnerships. So in this regard, the bank is certainly partnering with what would be considered non-traditional partners of the bank, which is CSOs, NGOs and humanitarian actors. And that's really important to crowd in different forms of expertise and knowledge than the bank can offer. And an example of this is a big operation in Bangladesh at the moment. It's a large water operation which has a disaster risk financing component, of which the disaster risk financing team there are partnering with an NGO consortium which is doing some early preliminary feasibility studies around the protection gap in the geographic focus area of the disaster risk financing component, and they're going to be doing some gender analysis. And in addition, I'd just like to raise two quick things: investment in qualitative data collection, and also investment in complementary communication activities to ensure that women are informed and know how to access disaster risk financing. And the list goes on. There's lots and lots of different approaches we're trialling and testing.
This is really useful, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about this in the resource as well that you're going to be talking to us about in a moment. One thing that I just picked up there, which I think is probably relevant to Milena and what you're going to speak to us about, is around the different maturity levels, and no one country or organisation is going to be at that same level of maturity. And I think that is something that we all need to bear in mind in our interactions with organisations as we're providing support to that, and recognising that there is going to be a continuum in terms of operational experience and understanding. So Milena, maybe from your side, what are the practical examples that you're seeing in terms of gender approaches with insurance supervisors? Are they at different maturity levels, and how are you working with them to overcome some of these data challenges specifically?
Yes, they definitely are at a different level of maturity, but then they also have different needs and priorities at certain times, and we see this across the globe. From again our perspective, working closely with supervisors, what we see is that any kind of insurance solutions do need to consider these already mentioned so many times unique contexts and risks that women have. We do believe that insurance supervisors also in this whole process need to be seen as and included as important stakeholders, again, to ensure the richness of perspectives. But let's not forget that their mandate is not only market development, they also take into account and make sure that consumers are adequately protected. So customer protection mechanisms that the supervisors have in all kind of solutions are very important. I can think of two examples that we had when working with supervisors. And this is something we do at a country level. Every year we launch Inclusive Insurance Innovation Lab, which we do for 3 to 4 countries. And last 2 years, the topic of the lab is climate. And then insurance supervisor in each of these jurisdictions, they form a team that covers the entire ecosystem. So they work with industry, they work with brokers, different associations. But we had, for example, a situation in India a few years ago where the entire team of the lab wanted to address the challenge of women clients not renewing their insurance policies on a regular basis. So they did a series of focus groups and discussions within these groups with female customers that previously had bought insurance but then did not renew, and then they wanted to see what was happening and why didn't renew their insurance policies. And it turned out it was because they were buying, and very often from the same organization, different insurance policies. So life coverage separately, health coverage separately, and all these policies had renewal dates with premiums that would come due at different points of time, and then maybe they wouldn't have funding available. This was understandable, as these sometimes different segments, and especially low-income segments, they don't have regular cash flow. So sometimes the premium would be due during the low liquidity situation where they simply couldn't afford it. But then themselves, they said that they would probably appreciate, and it would be easier for them if you would have one policy that covers several of those risks. And then because the supervisor was on the team, they were able to already design and think about a combine, like bundle product, one product that covers multiple risks. In India case, if I remember correctly, this was then one policy that had a mandatory coverage, like either life or health, and then set of optional alternative coverages. So again, looking into what is it that supervisors can do, it's really important that they understand the product, that they also understand and that they see that the products are designed, distributed in a way that they effectively reach out to women. Distribution channels are not, they don't just do selling. They're really, we believe they're vital to close the protection gap. They're really key to the uptake of insurance. And then we've also seen that face-to-face, for example, interactions are important, that when agents are female, that maybe women tend to trust these female, when they're approached by female agents, they tend to trust them more. So these are all things that that can make a difference for product simplification. For example, we've seen situations that as like one of the core principles, know your customer, requires IDs from customers, and very often women would not have these IDs, so maybe they cannot access not just insurance, any financial product, because they simply don't have IDs. So less documentation requirements, careful selection of technology. These are all things that can be significant enablers, and these are all things where supervisors can have say in these things. In this India example, when we looked more carefully into what could be appropriate distribution channel for this combi product, it did turn out that cell phones, I was going to say handies, are good, and that the women could use them, and then this really helped with us. So again, I would say, yeah, let's engage supervisors.
Yeah, thank you. So with this, one thing that really struck me, which we've heard from you both, is also around the qualitative data as well, and the importance of that and gaining those insights. So I think at this point, what I'd like to do is, just reflect. We've had some really, I think, useful insights here around the value of partnerships, around embedding informal documents and institutional processes, the agenda from the beginning and starting early at the project initiation, program initiation stage, and also recognition of this different maturity levels, and the need to also focus this into national policies as well, the national DRF strategies that are being developed or have already been developed. Now, at this point, what I'd like to do is just move now specifically to your resources from the World Bank side, and then we'll come back to you, Milena, from yours. And I think we're going to hear now more in depth about this new resource that you've got. So I think without further ado, could we have the slides back up again, please? And then we'll come over to Anya and Lisa to present yours in terms of incorporating gender into disaster risk reduction and finance and insurance products, please. Thank you.
Sure. The slides are tiny on my screen, but I'm going to just slide into them a little bit. So we're going to give you a quick overview of 3 of our latest resources. One, and they're summarized on this slide. One is an overarching sort of bigger guidance document that guides project leaders in incorporating gender into DRFI, and Lisa will give you more details. Embedded in that larger overarching document is what we call a results measurement guide. I'll talk about that. It's both a results measurement tool, but also a design assisting sort of mechanism. And then if we have time, and part of this package is also an emerging set of DRFI and gender case studies, which illustrate, with the help of real life projects, the principles, the recommendations, the kind of tips that are in this guiding document and how that translate into real life projects on the ground. I'm going to hand over to Lisa to give you an overview of the guide, and then I'll come back to talk about the measurements document.
Okay, thanks, Anya. So our new practical guide incorporating gender and disaster risk financing insurance, what we've done is develop a guide which is very operationally orientated. It's developed with bank teams first in mind. However, what we've done is we've made sure to use non-bank terms so that this is a global resource. So hopefully a lot of people tuning in today in this webinar, you will get benefit from this. It's definitely a global good. In terms of what we've included in this guide, we've got four main sections. One is an overview of why gender matters in disaster risk financing. Now, this includes both business or the rights-based case for why gender considerations are important in disaster risk financing. It also includes quite a good overview of key gender disparities that have implications for disaster risk financing programs very broadly. Our second sort of key part of the guide is we're looking at providing an overview of the World Bank's gender settings and their relevance to disaster risk financing. Obviously, that's of greater importance to a World Bank audience. the third section of the guide, which is where most of the, where our primary focus is the gender entry points at each stage of a standard project management cycle. So what we've included is quite detailed guidance, examples of what projects have done at each stage of the program management cycle. And what I mean by that is a standard cycle of stage 1 being project preparation, stage 2 being design, stage 3 being stage 2 being design, stage 3 being implementation, and stage 4 being evaluation and completion. And I'll talk to that a bit more in a minute. The fourth section of the guide is some project case studies. We've developed those based on current disaster risk financing initiatives the bank has, and they're in progress operations. So we've looked at what bank teams are doing to embed gender in these project case studies. Now, they're in summary in the guide, but we also have them individually in a more expanded format. In addition to that, we've got tons of information. We've got guiding questions for gender analysis. We've got the companion guide, which Anya mentioned, which is all focused very much on measuring gender results in disaster risk financing activities. We've got select data sources and links to where you can access relevant data for disaster risk financing. So there's a lot of information in this guide. We feel it's well structured, it's quite simple to use, and it's very operationally focused. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn to the next slide to just focus in. If someone could change the slide, fantastic. I just want to focus in now on the stages of the project cycle, which is the third component of the guide. And I just want to emphasize what we've looked at each stage of the project cycle. So in stage 1, in terms of project preparation, the guide focuses on providing lots of useful information and guidance around gender analysis and data collection. And that's what we're really encouraging project teams to do, is invest upfront in good quality data collection to build that gender landscape that can then inform your project preparation and eventually move on to design. But the emphasis here is investment in gender analysis and data collection. And what we've also emphasised too is if teams, due to time or resource constraints, do not have the ability to commission a gender analysis, it's all important to look at what existing analysis and sex disaggregated data you can pull to inform your activity. Stage 2, the design stage, we've really emphasised here that it's all important for teams to look at what the analysis has revealed in terms of gender disparities, what the bank tends to call gender gaps, and looking at the way that bank teams can potentially design gender activities to address those disparities. And also at the design stage, all important is the design of gender-specific indicators to try and monitor and track gender progress. At the design stage 2, we've emphasised the importance of what I mentioned before, is kick-starting conversations with clients or counterparts on gender. So it's getting gender on the agenda with the client as early as possible, and that obviously then paves the way for gender to be seen as a priority in the disaster risk financing engagement. Also important at the design stage, what the guide emphasises is using standard stakeholder engagement processes as means to look at opportunities to empower women through those processes, looking at ways in which you can engage women in a participatory way into government dialogues, into design activities. So just the importance of that. Stage 3, implementation. We focused on here tracking of gender progress and supporting clients with any redesign. So the importance of tracking the quality of any gender activities through implementation and keeping track of whether things are working or not, and if redesign is required. And equally in implementation, the need to look at assessing the gender capacity of the client or counterpart and ways in which you can help build gender capacity. So there's a lot of information on that. Stage 4, very quickly, completion and evaluation. We've emphasised here that the need to pave the way to have a meaningful evidence base for evaluation and completion. And that tracks back to ensuring that gender is integrated meaningfully in your design documentation. You've got gender indicators, your progress reporting includes gender reporting, etc. Okay, I will finish there and hand it over to Anya to drill down on our M&E guide. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So we call this M&E guide, but what this really is a document that helps you select gender interventions within DRFI and then give you some tools on how to measure results during the activities that you implement. So the document is both a project design guide and a results measurement tool. It starts with this short section and gives you some fundamental M&E do's and don'ts, just considerations to keep in mind when you develop your project's monitoring framework, when you're tracking gender-related results. It then moves on to give you a what we call an illustrative results chain. That's the left part of the slide, the left part of the graphic, that helps you identify common gender barriers that tend to be relevant in DRFI. And it suggests interventions that you could implement to lower those barriers. Then outlines associated outcomes, because that's part of any theory of change. And it finishes up with an indicator menu. You can pick monitoring indicators from that are relevant to those activities. So this helps you at design stage to identify potential gender gaps, plan gender activities based on those gaps, select realistic and measurable indicators, and then track your results during implementation and at completion. To kind of zoom in on the barrier identification first part of the chain, move your eyes to the right of the graphic. These are we identified a ton of commonly encountered gender barriers in DRFI and grouped them into 5 categories. I can't see them on my screen, so I'm going to try and go from memory. We have the business environment, disbursement, we have instrument and product design, data and awareness and capacity, I think. If we move to the next slide, please, that gives you a better sense of, yes, thank you. The buckets are replicated on the left there. And if you want to draw your eyes to the instruments and products section, it gives you a common gender barrier there, which I can't see either, but I think what we're saying here is that that product and instrument design don't necessarily always take women's needs into account. And Milena alluded to that earlier. That's a pretty common barrier. Attached to that, we suggest some remedial interventions that can be implemented to address that. If we go to the next slide, we can zoom in a bit more and make this even more concrete. So this replicates the barrier. Product design and development do not take women's needs into account. Some of the things you can do to address that is to consult with female stakeholders so they can have some input into the product design. Then you design the instruments in a way that meet some of women's risk management needs. You can also develop some gender-sensitive marketing messages and keep that in mind, because I'm going to give you an example of where that worked in real life pretty well. Also something Milena mentioned earlier, expanding the number of females acceptable to interact with other women, and there might be more of a pre-existing trust. The outcomes associated, hopefully, if you do this right, will be improved availability of instruments that actually cover women's needs. The marketing messages are adjusted in a way that they resonate with women and that reach women. and that, you know, eventually women have more access to relevant insurance instruments. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the indicators here. You'll get the slides, and it's just examples of indicators you can use to measure progress. This is one of our case studies. It's about the Horn of Africa Drive project, which is in a nutshell about providing drought insurance to pastoralists. And the marketing messaging adjustment that I mentioned earlier as one of the possible interventions really came to bear here. When we first developed the insurance product and marketed it, it was called livestock insurance. And women weren't all that crazy about it. They weren't, you know, buying it at the same rate as men were. We were checking into why that was, and it turns out, you know, it just didn't mean as much to them. It just didn't really, they didn't feel the product addressed their needs. So when we renamed it to family insurance, the interest shot up. Buying by women of the policies went up to the point where now 57 or 58% of all policyholders under the project are female heads of households. So that worked pretty well in this case.
That's really great.
I have much more to say, but I know we're getting very close to the end. So we have one more case study. If we have time, Lisa can touch on it very quickly. Otherwise, both case studies are already externally available, and we can send links.
You can send the link. That would be fantastic. I think what you've really shared is the very practical actions that can be taken as well, and that if people follow the guidance which is in your document, then they will be embedding gender into what they're doing. But also, we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it, we're doing it for results, and that's why it's important to track that impact as well and the results. And so having a menu of indicators that might be relevant for World Bank projects, but actually they might be relevant for other people's projects too. I think that's an excellent resource, so thank you for that. Let's move on now to the FEMA meter from Milena. So maybe could you introduce this tool for us and let us know where we can find it online afterwards? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I will do that now and try to be as brief as possible. So it is a tool that we developed for insurance supervisors that they can use to collect sex disaggregated data on some of the key gender indicators. Starting from, like I mentioned earlier, we cannot improve what we do not measure. We realized that this was very much needed. We can move on to the next slide. I've already mentioned the importance of DNI and IS work, so let's skip all the context. We can go to the next slide and maybe just talk. Yes, next, please. Talk about the tool. Yes. So what is this tool? It's a very simple Excel-based tool that helps supervisors collect and review sex disaggregated data. And it looks into 13 key indicators that are grouped into two categories. One is on the market access and usage side, and one is on the governance side. We'll look into these indicators on one of the next slides. The tool is quite simple, and it provides some immediate and simple output calculations. So this is kind of interesting because for supervisors, then it aggregates the data for the jurisdiction level, but it also calculates it provides some simple averages, percentages, and it provides a summary page, and then there are graphs for each indicator. It does the same for the industry. And then there are two different user groups. There are 4 different Excel sheets, 2 for insurance companies, and then 2 for regulators, supervisors, or policymakers. We can go to the next page. Yeah. I just wanted to say that a few features and advantages of the tool. It's very accessible. Like I said, we developed it in Excel. It's Microsoft Excel-based tool, thinking that everyone has access to and can use Excel. The tool is very easy to fill. Once insurers have their data, and they should have most of this data, the challenge is that the data might be scattered around, might not be digital, might be scattered around different parts of companies. But once they have it, they should be able to fill their part of the tool within half an hour. And then when supervisors receive data from multiple insurers, it only takes them a few clicks to aggregate this data. So we've calculated, when we've piloted this, when, for example, supervisors receive 30 sheets from insurers, it takes them half an hour to really calculate, aggregate and compile data at the jurisdiction level. And like I said, it does provide some immediate output. So then it does inform already both insurers and supervisors on where the data gaps are. And then, of course, they can go into further analysis to see where the root causes are and why are these inequalities happening. We can go to the next slide, and I think it shows, yes. So these are the indicators. I've already mentioned that there are two categories or two groups of indicators, and we're here looking at indicators that look at market access and usage. And here we've grouped indicators across 4 primary risk categories. So we're looking at accident and health, life and savings, small businesses, and climate and agriculture. And then you can see 7 indicators. This table is a little bit misleading because these 7 indicators are done for each of these risk categories. So, just think about that. Maybe table wasn't really the best solution for this, but then 7 indicators for each of these risk categories. On the next slide, we have on organizational diversity side, no, sorry, one slide back. Yes, here, this is what we look, I would say we look and we assess the most common human resources indicators, representation. We basically wanted to understand what is the employee situation, and then these 6 indicators should exist in and should be tracked in HR management information systems of every company. We can go now to the next slide. This is what the tool does help provide insight into where is the data missing. It does, I already mentioned, provide some simple, in the backend, it automatically provides some simple outputs and calculations. And then for regulators and supervisors, it does help understand the broader market. However, of course, it has its limitations, and then it will never replace the human element. And of course, it cannot look into the context, or it can never provide, this is still just data, but we know that we need to look deeper into the context of where this data is collected to see why are these inequalities happening. We can go to the next slide. I think it does show, the tool is available on our website. I think we've already posted it in the chat. Upper left and lower right corners, this is how the input tool looks like. There are definitions for each of the categories, because insurers are sometimes asking, oh, but where does my product fit under which of these categories? And then to upper right and lower left these are the graphs I was telling you about, that they immediately are showing. It's a nice way sometimes for the industry or for supervisors if they want to use these graphs in presentations, or if they want to use them for publications. They're already formatted and ready to be used. We can go to the next slide. I will not talk. We've developed and piloted the tool over the last year. We've piloted it with 4 countries. We were lucky that Argentina, Pakistan, Lesotho, and Zambia wanted to pilot the tool with us. We've tested its functionality, data collection, the depth of data, and everything. I think we can skip this and then go to. This is what I wanted to show is. What is it that we're doing now with the tool? We're of course promoting it and trying to motivate as many supervisors as possible to start collecting data with us. We're mainstreaming it into all our activities. For example, countries that this year are in our innovation lab. Whenever possible, we use the opportunity to promote it among partners activities. However, we will select a group of countries this year that we will work with collecting data. And then hopefully this is our intention, we will have resources available. We want to build an open data dashboard. We do believe that this data should be available and open, that then everyone can use it, because it's not only helpful for supervisors. With supervisors, we will work on defining their needs and priorities and try to help them design appropriate actions based on what the tool tells us where inequalities are. But we do hope that industry will also look into this and use this data as, business development opportunities. And again, this is all part of our gender portfolio development. Like I mentioned, we're organized in portfolios, and gender is one of our 4 portfolios. I think on the next slide, and this will be shared with you, these are just different tools and resources we have available on our website. And I think I will stop here. I had some of these tools on the next slides, but yeah, you can see them on the presentation.
That's amazing. Thank you, Milena. I think what we've seen here is that it's necessary to sort of create a plan for what you're collecting your data on and using existing tools. So there are tools available. People have already done some of the thinking around what kind of data needs to be collected. And it's just about using simple tools such as the one that you've created, and that can help guide those at different maturity levels to gather the insurance data in a disaggregated format. And that can be useful also for wider program implementation as well. So I think here we're hearing that there are lots of resources available for you all, and really grateful to all 3 of you for presenting those resources today and sharing really practical examples of how they're already being used. I know that they're going to be shared with you, so just to reassure all of those who are online that will be the case. So thank you very much. I don't think we've got any questions that have come up. Jonathan, I'm just going to turn to you as we start to close this session now and see if there's anything that we've missed during the back and forth here. But any final reflections from your side, please?
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I also can't see any questions in the chat, so I think we can wrap up this conversation here. Yeah, I don't think there's much left to say. Just one thing that I wanted to pick out, which stuck with me, is what Lisa said. When it comes to these guidelines and strategies, it doesn't need to be complicated. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And even though we know that there's a lot missing to this organizational shift towards gender inclusion, there is a lot of material out there. And yeah, I think the tools that you presented are great examples. And yeah, I would just like to invite everyone to reach out to us or to the panelists if you need further information. And I think with that, we can close this live talk. Thank you very much for attending, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks very much for hosting us.
Thank you, everybody.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.